Here is a list of 6 Vanguard Global Index Funds and ETFs, each having the potential to help you achieve your financial goals in the long term. To make things easier for you, I'm going to go through each one, highlighting information such as the risk level, fees, currency, performance and portfolio data. Where possible, I'm going to use the 5-year average annual performance data provided by Vanguard in their fund fact sheets. This will mean looking at the returns over 5 years, totaling it all up and dividing it by 5 to get the average annual return for each year. These figures are for interest only, and you should not rely on past performance as an accurate indicator of what will happen in the future. And although you could get great returns from investing into any of these funds, your capital is a risk from investing and you could end up getting less back. There are some lesser known ones on this list too that might be eye-openers for you, so stick around till the end to see if these are better suited to your circumstances. So let's first start working through this list, dealing with the more well-known choices, and starting with probably the most popular Vanguard Global ETF, which is the Vanguard FTSE All-World UCITS ETF. So the accumulation version of this fund has a ticker symbol of VWRP, with the income version of this fund having the identification ticker of VWRL. If you choose the accumulation version, the dividends get reinvested automatically. With the income version, the dividends get paid to you and then you decide whether to reinvest or not. If you reinvest those dividends immediately, then the performance of the income fund would be identical to that of the accumulation version. But any delay in doing this could impact your performance. If you intend just to reinvest the dividends, then the accumulation version seems the most efficient choice for me. Then there's no danger of you forgetting to reinvest those dividends or to using those dividends for something else and being tempted not to reinvest. This ETF tracks the FTSE All-World Index, which includes countries such as the US, UK, Japan and countries within Europe. And it also includes countries from the emerging markets such as China, India and Brazil. Its base currency is the US dollar, but it is sterling pound denominated and it's traded on the London Stock Exchange. This means that you'll keep foreign exchange fees to a minimum. The fund is diverse with a total of 3,666 stocks at the time of filming this video, and those stocks are of medium and large size companies. The amount of stocks in all of these funds does vary from time to time, so what you're seeing on the screen might not be what's actually in the fund at this time, but it will be very similar. Medium and large size companies are often referred to as mid and large cap in the financial industry. Moving on to fees, and the OCF or ongoing charge figure for this fund is 0.22%. And this means that for every £10,000 worth of investment you have, you pay £22 a year. This OCF gets deducted directly from the fund and you don't see this, and is the fee that the fund manager charges for its administration. Funds that include the emerging markets often have higher OCFs, as stocks within those countries are less liquid and harder to administer. The risk level for this fund is 6, which is on the higher end of the 1 to 7 scale, but this is quite usual for equities, with a greater price volatility but greater potential for higher returns. The fund is passive, meaning that it just tracks the FTSE All-World Index and does not try to better it. And using the VWRL income version of this fund for comparisons, as the VWRP is newer and doesn't go back that far, the average annual return for this fund over the last 5 years is 12.96%. As you can see on the graph, I'm comparing the fund in black with the benchmark in grey. They are almost identical and the fund tracks the index accurately. And taking a check of that past tracking performance is something that you should do as part of your research. You could pay a fund manager a higher fee to try and better the index by changing the proportion of the fund. This is called active investing, but there's no guarantee that they will be successful, and the past performance of active global fund managers has been pretty dismal. For me, I'm trying to keep my costs low and get a reasonable return on my investments, which I believe I will achieve with any one of these 6 global funds featured in this video, and not by trying to achieve additional returns by risking paying an active fund manager additional fees. Fees can really eat into your returns over time, and they should be a consideration when you're comparing funds. I'm not a financial advisor, by the way, and this video is a financial education video and should not be construed to be financial advice. If you are unsure of anything to do with investing, then seek advice from a suitably qualified professional. The US accounts for 61.6% of this fund. This will be a recurring theme with all of the funds I discussed today, as the US is the biggest proportion of market capitalization globally, with the largest global companies. Market capitalization, or market cap as it's known in the industry, is a proportion of the index you take depending on what your size is, with the largest companies taking up the largest proportion of the index. And an index is just a list of companies that are grouped together under certain characteristics. One of those characteristics could be size, another could be the region they emanate from. The index is then used as a measurement tool or benchmark for funds to track. The technology sector accounts for 26% of this fund, which makes sense when you consider that companies such as Microsoft, Apple and Nvidia form part of it. And the top 10 companies, all from the US, account for 18.78% proportion of this fund. So this fund has managed a very decent 12.96% average annual returns over the last 5 years. Are there better performing Vanguard funds that exist? Let's continue to work through this list and see. And the next fund is the Vanguard Global All-Cap Index Fund. This is a very popular fund, just like the first one we discussed. And the accumulation version of this fund has the ticker of VAFTGAG and the income version, a ticker of VFGAIGI. The fund tracks the FTSE Global All-Cap Index, which again includes emerging markets. This time, the fund is a mutual fund rather than an exchange-traded fund, ETF. The general principles of ETFs and mutual funds are the same, with investor money being pooled together to make large-scale purchases of shares that track an index. But one of the main differences is that ETFs are traded throughout the day on the stock market, whereas mutual funds are priced and traded once per day and purchased and sold through a fund manager. From an investor perspective, the differences are not worth losing sleep over. But what is worth considering is the availability of mutual funds and the fact that you won't get them on some of the cheaper investment platforms such as Trading 212 and Invest Engine. One of the things you can control as an investor is the cost of investing. You have to pay an ongoing charge figure to the fund manager for any funds that you invest in. And the first way that you can keep your costs low is by comparing fund OCFs. Another comparison to make when it comes to costs is where you're going to hold your funds, as those investment platforms or stockbrokers may charge a custody or platform fee. There are some cheaper investment platforms out there, such as the likes of Trading 212 and Invest Engine, that only hold ETF type funds, and they don't charge you for holding ETFs on their platform. There's less choice when it comes to mutual funds, but Vanguard charge a very reasonable 0.15% custody or platform fee, but you can only hold Vanguard funds with them. And AJ Bell charges a custody or platform fee of 0.25% for holding a mutual fund, with a charge of £1.50 every time you purchase shares in the mutual fund. This fund is sterling currency based. The other funds featured in this video are diverse, but you could call this one mega diverse, with 7,118 stocks of small, mid and large size companies. The ongoing charge figure for this fund is 0.23%, slightly higher than the last. And this means that for every £10,000 worth of fund that you own, you pay £23 per year. This fund has a slightly lower risk level of 5, and the average annual return for this fund over the last 5 years is 11.92%, slightly lower than the FTSE All-World ETF that we just covered. And remember that you might have additional platform fees to contend with this mutual fund. That's assuming that you use Trading 212 or Invest Engine for an ETF. The US accounts for the same 61.6% of this index, and the technology sector is the largest sector once more with 24.8% of the index. The top 10 companies, again all within the US, account for 16.77% of this index. And I do hope that you're enjoying this video so far. If so, I'd really appreciate it if you would consider giving the video a thumbs up, to subscribing to my channel and to turn on notifications so that you'd be aware of when I post new content. We now have two average annual return figures to compare with the FTSE All-World coming out on top so far with 12.96%. Let's now move on to some Vanguard global funds that exclude emerging markets. And the next one we're going to be looking at is the Vanguard FTSE Developed World UKITS ETF. The ticker symbol for the accumulation version is VHVG and the income version is VEVE. This ETF tracks the FTSE Developed Index. Its base currency is the US dollar, but it is sterling denominated and traded on the London Stock Exchange. It's diverse once more with 2,103 stocks from mid and large size companies, mid and large cap, but it excludes the emerging markets, so it excludes countries such as China, India and Brazil. The OCF for this fund is a reasonable 0.12%, meaning that for every £10,000 worth of fund that you own, you pay £12 per annum. And as you can see, you potentially get a lower ongoing charge figure for excluding emerging markets. The fund has a risk level of 6, and I've used the income version VEVE to obtain the average annual returns over the last 5 years, as VHVG, the accumulation version, hasn't been going that long. And the average annual return for this fund over the past 5 years is 14.08%. I guess the question you need to ask yourself is whether it's worth including countries from the emerging markets such as China and India, because as you can see from the funds that we've discussed so far, emerging markets has had a drag on performance. A factor in what you decide could be how long you intend to hold your investments for and your investing horizon. If you are younger, then you might consider that emerging markets will become developed markets at some stage, and you might want not to miss out on that growth. This fund, being an ETF, is also available on investment platforms such as Trading 212 and Invest Engine, meaning that you can purchase this fund and have zero platform fees. The US is dominant once more and accounts for 68.4% of the index, with the technology sector accounting for 26.1%. The top 10 companies, all from the US once more, account for 21.21% of the fund. So moving on to the next fund, and if you are a patriotic resident of the UK, then you might want to look away for this one, which is the Vanguard FTSE Developed World ex-UK Equity Index Fund. As it says in the title, this is the same as the Developed World Fund we just discussed, but without the UK included. And the accumulation version of this fund has an identification ticker of VDWXEIA and income VDWXEII. And this fund tracks the FTSE Developed World ex-UK Index. Its base currency is sterling. It has 1,988 stocks of mid and large sized companies which exclude the emerging markets. And the OCF for this fund is 0.14%. That's £14 a year for £10,000 worth of fund that you own. The fund has a lower risk level of 5. The fund is passive, meaning that it just tries to track the FTSE Developed World ex-UK Index and not try to beat it. And the average annual returns for this fund over the past 5 years is 13.64%. Slightly less than the Developed World Fund, but better than the first two global funds that we spoke about that had emerging markets included. The US accounts for a larger 71.3% of this fund, and the tech sector accounts for 27.2%. The top 10 companies, all from the US, account for 21.95%. I thought I would add this one into the mix to get you thinking about how you feel that the UK economy is going to fare going forward into the longer term, especially given the turmoil over the past few years. But please don't make this your main consideration. Your main consideration should be based on keeping costs low, choosing a passive fund, and choosing a passive fund which is well diversified. And the next fund, just like all the others we discussed, is a passive fund and it is well diversified, but might appeal to you, especially if you have greener environmental principles. And it is the Vanguard ESG Global All-Cap ETF. Firstly, let's get some abbreviations out of the way. ESG stands for Environmental, Social and Governance. And the accumulation version of this fund has a ticker of V3AB with the income V3AM. This ETF tracks the FTSE Global All-Cap Choice Index. Its base currency is the US dollar, but it is sterling denominated and traded on the London Stock Exchange. It has a large 5,822 stocks of small, mid and large sized companies from the developed world and emerging markets. The fund has a risk level of 6, and the fund is passive, meaning that it just tracks its index and does not try to beat it. And both the index and fund promote social and environmental characteristics by excluding companies based on vice products such as alcohol, tobacco and gambling, non-renewable energy such as fossil fuels and nuclear, weapons, and companies involved in severe controversies such as labour and human rights, environmental issues and anti-corruption standards. The fund is quite new, so Vanguard don't provide a fact sheet that goes back 5 years, so I've had to go to the fact sheet for the index itself. So assuming that the fund would have tracked the index accurately, as with all the other funds we looked at today, the average annual returns from the index itself for the last 5 years is 14.24%. Please bear in mind that all the other figures I've used in this video come from the Vanguard fact sheets themselves, so there may not be an exact comparison between this figure and the figures I quoted previously. However, what is useful from looking at this fact sheet is that it compares the ESG Global All-Cap with the regular Global All-Cap for the last 5 years and shows that the ESG Global All-Cap has performed better. So this fund could be a really competitive choice for you if you have greener credentials and you want to include emerging markets at a reasonable cost. And this might be something that you haven't considered in your research. For me, when I go to a supermarket and I want to buy specialist food such as vegan, I know I'm going to be paying more and probably going to be getting less for my money. And that was my opinion of how ESG funds might also work within the financial world. But this fund seems to argue that that's not necessarily the case. This fund, being an ETF, is also available on the cheaper investment platforms such as Trading 212 and Invest Engine, meaning that there'll be no platform or custody fees. The US accounts for 64.1% of the fund, with the technology sector accounting for 29.5%. The top 10 are all from the US, apart from Taiwan Semiconductor, which has crept into the top 10 for the first time. And the top 10 account for 21.3% of the index. And the last fund we're going to look at today is another ESG fund, which is the Vanguard ESG Developed World All-Cap Equity Index Fund. The accumulation version of this fund has a ticker symbol of VAEIAGA and the income version is VAEIAGI. The fund's base currency is sterling, but there is also a US version of this fund available, which is sterling denominated. It has 4,437 stocks of small, mid and large size companies, and this fund excludes emerging markets. And the OCF for this fund is a slightly lower 0.20%, meaning that for every £10,000 of the fund that you own, you pay £20 per annum. The risk level of this fund is 5, slightly lower than the last ESG fund we spoke about, and the fund is passive again, meaning that it just tracks its index and doesn't try to better it. The fund is quite new again, so there's not performance data going back 5 years, but there is on the US dollar version, so we'll use that for comparisons here. And the annual average return over the last 5 years on that fund is 12.86%. The US accounts for 71% of the index, with the technology sector accounting for 30%. The top 10 companies are all from the US, with Taiwan Semiconductor not making the cut this time. And they account for 23.31% of the index. So there you have it. 6 Vanguard Global Index funds and ETFs, some you might have heard of and some less known. Whether you want a mutual fund or an ETF, one that includes emerging markets, one that excludes the UK, or one with greener credentials, what you can be sure of with all these funds is that they are diverse and low cost. Diversity is a free gift to you and ensures that you don't bet all your money on too few outcomes. You may encounter additional platform fees if you choose a mutual fund, but if these are your preference, then you can still keep your costs low by using Vanguard's investment platform. The next video is another global fund video which features companies in addition to Vanguard such as BlackRock and Invesco, which might help you with your research also. And once again, thanks very much for watching.